I'm Mark Dresner, and this is MDRP TV, an executive interview series featuring specialists and experts in government pricing and reimbursement programs. Joining us today is Ryan McKinney. He is a director with Alliance Life Sciences. Ryan, welcome to MDRP TV.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. What class of trade issues do you think that should be taken into account when calculating AMP?
Class of trade, take one quick step back, is actually one of the two filters you apply to your transactions and to your customers to determine what's eligible for the AMP calculation itself. With the evolution of the regulations around AMP since its inception in 1991, that guidance has evolved, as has the whole program, and with that evolution, it's always included, I guess you call them clarifications around which trade classes are eligible for AMP. And what we see in the industry now is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 40 to 60 different trade designations now needed by manufacturers in order to comply with those regulations. But with each one of those clarifications, there's still a lot of ambiguity left behind. An example is the definition of wholesaler. It's defined to include but not limited to, and it's that second part which is not limited to now, which leaves a whole host of issues open for interpretation by the companies. So from a policy and procedure perspective, it's necessary for manufacturers really to sit down with legal counsel, kind of look at the regulations and make the determinations about which different trade classes they need to consider when calculating AMP. And then also have somebody from operations bring in the specifics about that business to make decisions on how those interpretations need to be made. A lot of the determinations are made based on what are called rosters, which are lists provided by your wholesalers or GPOs, distributors, that kind of list out the customer type based on who they sell the drug to. The onus is on the manufacturer, so if you're relying on that information, it may become an issue for you if it's not accurate. So really big issue, second big issue is really the quality of the data that you have to support those designations. One of the big pitfalls that I see are some manufacturers try and use that class of trade filter to accomplish other things. So for instance, the 340B sales are not eligible for the AMP calculation. And so a lot of companies think, okay, I'm going to create a 340B class of trade, and therefore every transaction that I classify as 340B I know is going to be excluded from my AMP, and therefore I'm going to be compliant with the regulations. The fallacy in that thinking really is that a 340B entity may actually make a purchase off a non-340B contract. So by identifying them as a 340B entity within your class of trade filter structure, you then automatically are going to exclude that sale that may be off contract, so to speak, off 340B contract, which would be inappropriate in terms of calculating AMP. Along those same lines, I've seen class of trades for foreign territory sales, like U.S., Puerto Rico, Guam, where again they create a class of trade that says, Puerto Rico, and thinking that's going to help them filter the transaction out of the calculation. And the best practice, I guess, or the way you really should accomplish that is going back to the 340B example, is really classify the entity as the type of entity it is. It's typically a provider or clinic. And then once that distinction is made, when you're processing your chargebacks, you will look to your 340B contract sales and the pricing that went out the door. And for those transactions, you should be just verifying that they were 340B eligible at the time. But the class of trade, for instance, for that 340B provider should be recorded based on the entity type.
Thanks for sharing this information and talking to us today, Ryan. I really appreciate having you.
And thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. And that concludes this episode of MDRP TV. I'm Mark Dresner. Until next time, thanks for tuning in.